Hey there. Fundraising as a tech startup is hard. It's no secret. You have seen it in movies, you have seen it in TV series, you have seen it in pop culture, you have read it in newspapers. The number of startups that fail because they run out of money or they were not able to raise funds is massive. That is quoted as number one reason why majority of the startups fail. Of course, it's very hard to fundraise because you are operating in an environment of risk and uncertainty. And as an entrepreneur, you don't know what's going to happen. And as an investor, you would have even more of a risk appetite to make sure that your financial investments yield returns. Here are the reasons that I believe why fundraising as a tech startup founder is hard. Number one, high competition. It's a simple demand and supply situation where you have way more startups vying for funding and not as many funding sources that are available. And for those funding sources available, because of the risk profile involved, they typically involve a lot of guesswork or a lot of decisions that are based on gut feeling. And hence, it has been seen more often than not that investors typically tend to trust founders who they either know personally or have come through people who they know within their network or have done something significant in the past in their previous startup journey. And hence, the in essence, startups are competing with each other for the same pool of money that is available. And as a startup grows, the need for funding increases, the need for support increases, especially when you're in a growth profile, as you see in startups. And hence, as the startup grows, the possibility or the availability of the pool of funds or the number of sources decreases, and hence your competition gets even more intense. I would say it's very hard to compare two different startups because they are likely in different spheres. They have different teams, they have different approaches, they have different vision, they have different employees. So how do you reconcile with the fact that a lot of startups are vying for the same pool? And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of startups, even though they have brilliant ideas, they have great traction, even then they are not able to continue pursuing that because of lack of funds. The second reason is risk aversion. Humans are built to avoid risk. That's how we have evolved over thousands of years. That's how we have survived. And as an investor, obviously, I can understand the fact that you would like to make the best informed decision possible. And the basis of your decisions are a pitch deck, quite often, financial projections that is 100% inaccurate or will be inaccurate, and a level of gut feeling that you have to go off of. And that sense of risk aversion blocks out or increases the barrier to entry for a lot of early stage startups to make new connections, to find new sources of investor partners, or get into VC circles that are often walled off and that are often very strong within a community, especially in the coasts. In regions where I am, for example, in the Midwest, people are often more open. Obviously, the supply is lesser as well. The number of investors are lesser, but I believe that the sense for anyone new to enter the market is easier in the Midwest as opposed to the coast, where there is obviously more availability, but there is also more gatekeeping that happens. Third, market understanding. Now, you must realize that startup founders and startup teams spend their whole life and 24 hours of the day in the market they are in, trying to understand the customers, trying to understand the market. As an investor, when you come in, you have often have very limited understanding of the market of the startup that you intend to invest in or you consider investing in. Even though they may have considerable work experience in that field, as things change, as environments change, it is very unlikely that the investor will have a complete and full understanding of the market of the startups or have a very clear understanding of where the future is going towards. And hence, that imminent lack of market understanding in whichever niche the startup is operating could be one of the reasons why it gets extremely hard for startup founders to relay their ideas in a way that grasps the interests of potential investors going ahead. The fourth reason is valuation and equity. Fundraising is all about selling a part of your business, and in return, you get financial resources using which you can help further propel the value of your business by investing it in people, in products, and in customer acquisition. Quite often, during the later stages of negotiations, there is often a disconnect between what the valuation is perceived by the founders and the valuation perceived by the investors. There is a huge disconnect. The founders, they know what their company is worth because they see the vision and they're dedicating their life to it. The investors, on the other hand, just deal with or interact with a lot of different startups, and in their head they may have benchmarks that may or may not correctly reflect the true value of the startup. And hence the disconnect between the valuation or the understanding is also results in considerable lack of access to a lot of startups. It may also lead to a lot of predatory behavior in the form of certain VCs who may take advantage of the evident lack of market understanding from the founder or from the founding team and force their hand into accepting a deal that could be quite antagonistic, and that would not be fair to the startups. And vice versa, where startups founders may be delusional about how much their companies are worth, and hence it doesn't connect. So that is definitely one of the reasons why it gets even more harder, even more complex, especially when ego is involved in terms of fundraising. And finally, I think regulatory and legal hurdles are one of the issues when startups who deal with intellectual property, and just because of the nature of startups, since they're small and they're inevitably getting into a market which would have larger players involved, the larger players who have considerably more resources, legal team in place, and just much more wherewithal to drive up or protect their IPs, startups might find it very difficult when they come up against these organizations who may rightly or wrongly blame these startups for violating any intellectual patterns that they may perceive, and hence put a huge roadblock in the way of these startups who are trying to disrupt a whole industry. These may be in the form of government regulations or government agencies regulations, or these could be in the form of just simple cease and desist that may sound a death knell for these startups, making it even harder for them to raise funds. So I think these are the five main reasons why I think it's very hard for startups to raise funds. I have raised $1.5 million for my startup so far. It is a drop in the bucket of the universe of funds that have been raised. But I'm pretty proud of me and my team, and I'm very happy to say that the funds that I have raised are through VCs and angel groups who I have had no prior connection to before coming into this country. And like I said, startups in the Midwest typically tend to have a greater support, at least that is what I have felt, in terms of innovation and technological advancements. Fundraising is hard, but the key is to keep ahead, keep sharing your story with everyone who wants to hear it. And I think it's just a matter of pushing ahead, encouraging your team, and making sure that the whole world will root for you and support for you as you grow.